All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for showing up this morning to officially welcome back Kelly Kroskoff as President of Basketball Business Operations for the
This was not anticipated by anyone. At last, the quiet section was spoken aloud by the Indiana Fever president, who was seated at the top of the entire organization. Her remarks raised eyebrows and stirred up the entire basketball music community. The music, politics, pressure, locker room dynamics, and the struggle between creating a champion and a brand were all exposed for the first time. And everything you believe to be true about Caitlin Clark's circumstances in Indiana is altered once you learn the whole tale. Let's now return to the beginning of this tale. Indiana was one of the least well-known teams in professional basketball prior to Caitlin Clark ever donning a Hoosier uniform. 6 victories in 2021, 5 victories in 2022, and 13 victories in 2023 are being discussed. They were a joke for almost a decade. No spotlight, no buzz, no fans. There wouldn't be any cameras. The seats weren't packed. Despite the fever, the WNBA scene had radically transformed. That was the truth. A once proud franchise was reduced to a mere afterthought. But despite their best efforts, nobody in that front office could have anticipated what transpired. When the first overall choice in the 2024 WNBA draft entered the room, everything changed dramatically. Beyond simply lowering the temperature, Caitlin Clark accomplished more. The entire league was altered by her. Everywhere she performed, the crowds were completely sold out. TV ratings that broke records, jerseys that were selling out quickly, and a media frenzy unheard of in women's basketball since, well, music. The company had to make a decision in the midst of that eruption. Would they attempt to change the direction of the wave or ride it? At that point, the entire narrative becomes intriguing. Because at a time when the fever required someone at the top who knew exactly what they had, a once-in-a-generation athlete who was revolutionizing women's sports on her own, the front office took a shocking decision. Kelly Kroskoff has been appointed President of Business Operations and Basketball. It made sense on paper. Having formed the team that won the 2012 championship, Kroskoff has personal experience with the fever. The group introduced her with all the excitement that was expected. However, something in the rhetoric of her first news conference brought up difficulties that many at the time chose to ignore, but that would later come back to destroy the entire company months later. No one noticed the warning signs until it was too late, since they were concealed in plain sight. At this time, everything fell apart. The absence of Caitlin Clark due to an injury in July 2025 raises concerns about the fever. Due to a groin problem that has been plaguing her for weeks, Clark has only participated in 11 games this season. Fans are irritated. The team is on the verge of making it to the postseason. There is increasing pressure. On the same day that the video from Kroskoff's first press conference magically resurfaced on social media, the internet reveals something hidden in his October 2024 address that the majority of people had completely missed. Indeed, Aaliyah Boston and Caitlin Clark are our main performers, and we plan to keep developing them. Kroskoff looked directly into the cameras during the press conference and declared, "This is about the Indiana Fever. However, I want this team to become a national leader and a long-lasting brand like Apple. Similar to Apple." That was all that was required. The video went viral in a matter of hours, and its fan base quickly expanded, because a lot of people didn't hear that vision in those words. It served as a caution. At the Fever front office, this kind of response was unheard of. Fans weren't only angry. When they were angry, they were noisy, well-organized, and hard to ignore. Because of what Apple actually accomplished, the comparison to Apple struck a different chord. One visionary who established the foundation for their entire identity was Steve Jobs. And the empire almost fell apart as soon as he left. As a result, when Clark supporters saw the Fever president draw the same analogy, they perceived something in it that seemed illuminating, as if the organization already considered Clark to be a component rather than the focal point. A fan responded to enduring brands that align with their values on social media. Steve Jobs, the company's star and visionary, is credited with making Apple a global icon. Another fan didn't hold back either. They claim that when Clark eventually decides she's had enough of a front office skip fire, the Fever will acknowledge that they squandered the greatest chance in women's sports history. The answers, comment sections, and message boards all express the same basic sentiment. You don't minimize the most significant person this team has ever had, and you keep focusing on her. There was more to the criticism than just noise. It was a decision, and someone in that organization realized how dire things were becoming. Because Kroskoff's entire account disappeared a few hours after the video gained popularity. Absent completely where there had been a social media presence only a few days prior, there was quiet instead of a message or an explanation. At this point, it becomes much more complicated. Because the players on the court, the ones who were being criticized online who actually dressed next to Caitlin Clark every night, were telling an entirely different, much more accurate tale. When Lexi Hull, one of Clark's closest friends, sought for a profile in Glamour magazine, she had nothing. Although virtually no one wearing a Fever uniform had previously been willing to reveal, Hull said that everyone in the league already knew. Because of the media attention and the people who have supported us since Caitlin arrived, I believe there is some jealousy regarding the Fever. She went one step further and disclosed that teams from all over the league had been discussing things like, "We can't let the Fever win" in their own locker rooms. A disturbing reality that had been developing for 2 seasons was revealed by Hull's remarks. These days, the Fever do more than simply play hoops. Every time they take the floor, rival teams have singled them out due to the players on their side. And because of one person, not the team's performance. Sophie Cunningham went one step farther. The player who established herself as Clark's enforcer on the floor and made it obvious early on that taking cheap shots at her teammate would have consequences had already come forward and confirmed what the entire league had been wondering about. Cunningham claimed to have heard it prior to joining Indiana. She claimed that there were explicit discussions about Clark in the locker room while she was still in Phoenix. That rivals weren't merely trying to win. They were attempting to make their point. The story of Clark being physically targeted and receiving an unending welcome to the W moment has been chronicled throughout the season. Even objective observers were shocked by the intensity of the physical play directed at Clark. And many were genuinely questioning if the officiating had adequately safeguarded her by the time her season ended after just 13 games due to a groin injury. A growing percentage of people who were listening carefully said that the answer was no. However, that was only the start. The inside story of what it's really like to be Caitlin Clark's coworker was beginning to emerge since all of this was happening in the public eye. It was likewise not what the critics had anticipated. Caitlin Clark's detractors have primarily promoted a straightforward story, that the players disliked her and that she caused issues in the lavatory, that the prominence and attention caused cracks that no team could endure. In a September 2024 podcast, Hall of Famer Cheryl Swoops claimed that important members of the Fever were subtly expressing their disinterest in attending, that they could no longer cope with the circumstances surrounding Clark. It spread quickly. It either became part of the background noise that accompanied the Fever into their second season together, or it was rerun everywhere. Unless, of course, Clark herself had to appear as a guest on another March Madness program hosted by Subbard and Diana Taurasi. Then she tackled it head-on. She wasn't upset. She didn't act defensively. She was remarkably composed about it. In essence, you grow accustomed to people believing they are aware of what goes on behind closed doors when, in fact, they are not. She continued to receive encouragement from her co-workers in that locker area. During the 2025 playoffs, Clark's teammates flooded the floor once she recovered from her injuries. They ended her interview after the game. They unexpectedly appeared for her. There was a big jubilation in the locker room when the Fever won the Commissioner Cup. Players connected in a way that didn't seem like an act, laughing and genuinely delighted for one another. The media hasn't yet assembled this. Whether or not Caitlin Clark's teammates liked her was never at the center of the Fever narrative. It concerned whether the front office, which was in charge of them all, was prepared to surround her with the required parts and give the project their whole focus. The distinction is that Boston and Clark had a tight relationship because the connections were genuine on the court level. Lexi Hull was wary. Before they had even played a game together, Sophie Cunningham and other new players were swooning over Clark. The rookie who made the final roster, Michaela Timpson, respected Clark in a way that is difficult to emulate. Following the expansion draft, Clark left comments on Instagram for two of her teammates, saying things like, "My Aussie for life" for Chloe BBY and "Cub I love you" for Christy Wallace. These were genuine friendships with genuine affection. However, winning titles requires more than just contacts. And at the center of it all was that tension. In addition to the Apple soundbite, Kelly Kroskoff's remarks at the October 2024 press conference included something that many people overlooked in their haste to express their disapproval. Kroskoff was referring to the long game when she stated that she wanted the Fever to be a lasting brand. When Indiana won their lone championship in 2012, Caitlin Clark was 11 years old. She added that sometimes it takes a generation to go to the next stage. Perhaps the group had been working for someone else all along, sowing the seeds for a 10-year-old someplace who would find inspiration in what the Fever was doing at the time. Depending on how you interpret the real priorities of the front office, you may see that as either vision or deception. However, this cannot be disputed. Beginning in 2024, a brand prevented fans from attending the Fever. They arrived as a result of a player. They spent hours at a time behind the wheel. They received monies that the WNBA had never seen before. The league had never anticipated the amount of spectators. Additionally, ticket sales decreased when Clark's injuries prevented him from playing in ways that could be quantified, recorded, and publicly acknowledged. TV viewing declined. It was impossible to deny the brutal reality of what Clark represented to that franchise. During that press conference, Kroskoff made a statement that stood out from the others. "If you are an intelligent basketball player and you see how she plays, you would want to play with Caitlin Clark." The opportunity to play with Clark was crucial for veterans because the Fever's ability to recruit had subtly developed into one of the most intriguing storylines in the WNBA, which turned out to be more true than even she probably realized at the time. Players had to accept wage reductions in order to travel to Indiana. Clark's fan base wasn't limited to crowded stadiums. Players wanted to be a part of something greater than a typical WNBA season because of the atmosphere it was fostering. The Fever had become one of the league's most sought-after destinations in spite of this. Not because of a brand plan, but rather because of a basketball player who packed buildings wherever she went and improved everyone around her. Let's see what the Fever accomplishes in 2026 and beyond. In the WNBA expansion draft, the team lost two players, Christy Wallace to Toronto and Chloe BBY to Portland. Clark herself had to put up with a season that was meant to be her breakthrough second year, but instead it was a nightmare of injuries that kept her to only 13 games in the regular season. She was chosen for the All-Star game despite averaging 16.5 points, 8.5 assists, and 5 rebounds per game. Despite sitting on the sidelines and wearing civilian clothes, she was still the buzz of the league. Beneath it all, the Fever were constructing a $78 million performance center that Kroskoff referred to as the foundation for the next generation. The music facility is intended to be the kind of home base that draws top talent for many years to come, even if it won't open until 2027. The components are in place. The concern is whether those responsible for rendering decisions above the court are aware of their options and whether they plan to act before it's too late. Beneath every argument over the Fever's headquarters, every issue with Clark's teammates, and every impassioned comment about conflict in the locker room, there's a larger reality that is actually far simpler than all of it. In just 1 year, this team went from winning 5 games a season to being the most watched team in women's basketball. It's not a reconstruction. It's a revolution. Furthermore, brand strategy boards do not lead to revolutions. They occur